Definitely.
you for setting up this platform, Chris. It's I hope more to come. Very kind and empathetic person. I appreciate.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. We're
Uh,
happy to have you. All right. Welcome, everyone, to Peace Through Action USA's virtual event, Navigating Microaggressions, Understanding and Interrupting Everyday Harms. My name is Chris Wolanski, and I'll be your host this evening. We're excited to have you join us for this important learning experience that affects so many lives in deep and often unspoken ways. First, I'd like to review the event arrangements with you. So we've got ourselves going. This is being recorded. We encourage you to keep your microphone muted if you're just kind of a passive audience member, because sometimes the dog in the background or husband doing dishes like to interrupt and have their word in the meeting. Um, but yeah, we're really excited to talk about this theme tonight. So first, I just kind of want to introduce our mission at Peace Through Action USA, where we inspire and equip everyday people to increase safety, belonging, and peace in their relationships and communities by cultivating their compassion and increasing their constructive communication and conflict resolution skills. Um, this is a big part of our work is teaching people skills that they can use in their everyday lives. And I just want to uplift our guests tonight who are helping us do that. So we have Gary Wingfield Jr., who is a spoken word artist and community organizer. And he's going to be talking about his experience with microaggressions. And we have Sherry Tardio, who's been the executive director of the Community Mediation Center of Calvert County. And they'll both be joining us tonight. And I'd also like to just acknowledge our strategic partners. Thank you so much to Broadview Church, who made this event possible tonight. As supporters in our work, we're profoundly grateful for their vision, dedication, and commitment to the pursuit of peace. Broadview Church's support in our work also includes being our local partner in our Community Peace Project concept in Calvert County, Maryland. For our guests in Calvert County, look forward to hearing from us in our newsletters and social media postings, as we have an in-person offering coming up on Sunday, May 5th. And we also have an exciting summer program for youth ahead, so stay tuned. So tonight is an interesting topic. So let's talk about microaggressions. Why is this a worthwhile subject to talk about? They are micro after all. Microaggressions may be small in form, but they're really not small in impact. They can make someone feel like they don't belong. They can damage trust, silence voices, and contribute to mental health challenges. And they often go unaddressed, not because people don't care, but because we don't always have the tools or language to speak up. That's what tonight is about, gaining those tools together. So thank you again for your presence with us this evening. Now I'd like to prompt you all with a one-word check-in. So in the chat, if you could, share your name, where you're joining from, and one word that expresses how you're arriving tonight. Looking forward to seeing everyone's replies. All right, we've got some viewers from DC, Calvert County, Chesapeake Beach, curious, wonderful. Great, tired. with you there.
Chris, there's a question in the chat asking if they would be able to get a copy of the recording later.
Of course, yes. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Sherry.
Sure.
Yes, we will most definitely be sharing a recording. So no worries there. All right, before we start our discussion, I want to briefly introduce myself. My name is Chris Wolanski. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I'm the Director of Programs and Partnerships for Peace Through Action USA. I'm a career-long educator, and I've been involved in nonprofit work and social service, both domestically and abroad, throughout my adult life. In my personal time, I'm a spoken word poet, National Poetry Slam champion, and hold a master's degree in communication and oral storytelling. It goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway, that I love what I do at Peace Through Action USA, and I'm thrilled to be here with you tonight. So if you have any questions or have an interest in potentially volunteering for Peace, please feel free to reach out. I've included my email at the end of this presentation, so I'd love to connect. Tonight, I'm joined by two guest speakers whose work directly reflects the theme of this event. First, we have Gary Wingfield Jr., who's a spoken word artist and community organizer, and Sherry Tardio, who's a very seasoned professional mediator with the Community Mediation Center of Calvert County. Each of them brings valuable insight and personal experience to this conversation. So we've dedicated more time later in the session to learn more about each of their work. But for now, let's do some brief introductions. Gary, can you please introduce yourself and explain what inspires you to speak with our audience tonight? Oh, seems... Gary, are you with us? Okay, we'll give you a moment. All right, there. We'll start with Sherry then. Sherry, can you please introduce yourself and explain what inspires you to speak with our audience tonight?
Sure. So, hi, everybody. I'm Sherry Tardio. I am the recently retired executive director of the Community Mediation Center of Calvert County. We provide no-cost conflict resolution services to our county. And I do, as Chris said, lots of mediations, facilitations, and other types of training there. I've worked with Chris before on a couple of programs, and he asked if I would be one of the panelists for this one and talk a little bit from my perspective with the Mediation Center and some of the ways that we try to prevent microaggressions, and also, if we have time, how we deal with them if they happen to come up in mediation. So I'm really glad to be here tonight. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Sherry. We really appreciate you being here with us. Offer so much perspective that we can learn from. Gary, seems like your tech is working now.
Yeah, the mute. My fingers are too large for the spot. It's challenging technology, but thank you for having humor about this. I do too, but yeah. I guess introduce myself. I got preoccupied with not being able to hit the mute button. My name is Gary Wingfield Jr. Chris and I. First of all, Chris and I, we've met. I think we meet on a few different levels, and I think the empathy level and the universal level of our paths really helped this come together. I'm just an artist who happened to be intelligent enough and be placed in a position in Pittsburgh where I was, forced to learn about this. Forced is a bad word for it, but as an artist, as a scientist, as a thinker, as a philosopher, it's hard not to be existential about feeling disconnected, even if it's on a small incremental level in your community. It's almost a natural progression. I hope I addressed what the question was in the introduction.
Yeah, most definitely.
Please tell me. This is a very fluid time in my life. I actually just got off of work a few hours ago. It was a long day, but thank you. That's why I have my Prangle shirt on. Anyway, that's my life.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you for being here with us too, Gary. We're so grateful to have you and really look forward to hearing more of your perspectives.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, definitely. All right, everybody. So let's get into it. What are microaggressions anyway? Microaggressions are brief, often subtle, everyday slights, things like comments, body language, assumptions. Condescension is often really close with microaggression. They signal exclusion or reinforce stereotypes. They're often unintentional, but intent doesn't erase impact. Some examples might include, "You don't look disabled." "Wow, you're so articulate." "Where are you really from, though?" They often seem harmless to the person saying them, but they can feel like tiny paper cuts to the person receiving them. And over time, they create real harm. So let's look at the different categories where microaggressions often show up and how we can respond. So first, we're going to look at some strategies. And I'm going to kind of review just some general strategies, and then we're going to look at more nuanced strategies that can be employed to support people of various identity groups um, who may experience microaggressions in different ways. But first, we're going to kind of zoom out and look at some basic strategies as well as case studies that support those strategies. So our first one here is metacommunication. Sometimes the best tool is talking about the communication itself, looking almost with a bird's eye view at what are the conversational turns happening here. And you can try saying something like, "Hey, I want to check in about something that felt a little off. Can we talk about that?" And this kind of reduces defensiveness because you're actually talking about the conversational turn rather than you as terrible person said thing to me victim who, and it creates this kind of escalating vacuum there. Whereas there's been some research that shows that having this reduction in defensiveness through metacommunication really builds clarity and trust. And Portland State University leaned into this. And you can see this image here, this "Let's Talk About It" card. These educators introduced simple pocket-sized "Let's Talk About It" cards. They were designed to help students initiate conversations about microaggressions and about these conversational slights by naming the dynamic without blaming the other person. Students who experience microaggressions could hand the card to the person and use the phrase written on it out loud. So something felt off just now. Can we talk about that interaction? So metacommunication works best when it's low stakes, invitational, and clear. And Portland State's use of a neutral check-in tool created space for follow-up without shame. Reframing is kind of next to that, right? It's sort of adjacent to that. And it also helps de-escalate. This is a process of shifting a narrative. So, hey, I'm going to try to separate the intention and impact here. I know you meant well, but here's how that landed for me. This disarms tension and opens dialogue. It's a door for understanding rather than shutting people down. Cognitive behavioral research shows that reframing is one of the most effective ways to promote behavioral change. And a case study that I've included here as in the picture is actually from a health clinic staff training in Chicago. A women's health clinic trained front desk staff to reframe unintentionally biased patient interactions. So one common situation when a staff member would assume a Black woman's child had a different father was obviously a problem. So staff were trained to pause and reframe by saying, "Thank you for your patience. Let me rephrase that to make sure I'm being respectful." So they practice shifting assumptions and rephrasing and reframing in real time. So, for you who's sitting in the audience right now, you may think that, "Oh, well, I just kind of work in this weird bureaucratic thing where I don't really like operate with a lot of people or whatever." There's actually opportunities to bring this into a variety of the places in which you interact in your day-to-day life, whether that's your home, your school, your work environment, and reframing by reframing some of those practices, you're reframing the entire environment that you are kind of cohabitating with people. And integral to this is perspective taking. And perspective taking is something we're going to do a little bit of tonight. And that's something I'm really grateful for Gary being so generous with his energy to allow us to step into that perspective. But it's about putting yourself in the other person's shoes. So really asking how might that have felt to them. Um, for an image, I was thinking about including some of those optical illusions, where you look at the thing and it's either a bunny rabbit or a duck, or you're staring into that book with all the jagged puzzle pieces, and you see a swan on a lake and your uncle sees Charles Manson. It's just like you get to see that everybody's got a different perspective in life. But as how this really showed up in real time was in the Brooklyn Public Library system. They created this empathy circle practice program. And so they did this monthly empathy circle where library patrons and staff could reflect on lived experiences with bias. And one participant, a white volunteer, shared how hearing directly from a queer teen about being misgendered at school gave her new language to support. She mentioned, I thought I understood, but now I feel what it must be like. I'll be more mindful going forward. So allowing that space to step into another person's perspective is really important. And I'm sure Sherry can add to this as we hear more about her work with mediation. That perspective taking is a big part of that. And then lastly, making repair a norm. I was kind of thinking about other images that I could include for this slide, and I just kept getting the oil change, an image of an oil change, and relationships take maintenance. It's a continual process of tension and release of tension, but sometimes there can be damage to a relationship that it may not be able to grow back from without concerted effort. Um, and I wanted to include this image of a bowl that's been treated with the kintsugi technique in Japan, which is where they break a bowl and then piece all the pieces back together using gold joinery. And that kind of aesthetic is that the bowl is now more beautiful because of that restorative process. Um, so we can do much the same type of thing with our relationships. So if you cause harm, focus on repair. I'm sorry. I appreciate your honesty. What would support feel like now? Um, sometimes it can be a bit of a challenge to kind of urge someone to now instruct you on how to fix the issue. But it's also important to invite them to say, what can I do to meet you right now? And so the other image here I've included is for a restorative circle process that was used among youth in Oakland. Was employed with teens, facilitators, and they emphasize micro repair, which are quick, honest apologies paired with a follow-up question. Is there something I can do to support you now? So this became a norm in peer conflict settings and modeled what healthy, fast repair looks like. We've talked about restorative circles a lot in our events, and one recurring kind of theme is that there are certain limitations to these practices, right? Some of them, are you take like Advil, and others are not going to fix your heart condition. So I think sometimes it's a matter of scale and gravity, but restorative practices can be really, really meaningful, especially to repair the harm that has been caused, especially with microaggressions. So now we're going to explore some categories of harm. And I wanted to talk about just the various lines of identity that we all kind of meet at the intersections of. So this image here of cars intersecting at an intersection is connected to this topic of intersectionality, that we all have race and ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, disability, religion, or belief systems that we're all kind of inhabiting simultaneously you know, at different junctions of the intersection together. And now we're going to take a look at each of those intersections and really kind of plumb some other tools that we might use to explore that. And I'll talk again about some case studies as well. So some tools would be simply practicing cultural humility, which means staying curious and open. It doesn't necessarily mean, oh, you need to lower yourself or act small. Instead, having curiosity is a really great medicine. Embracing active anti-racism. So this is sort of taking the approach that you can't be complicitly anti-racist. You have to be actively anti-racist. There's kind of it's a participatory experience. um, so that didn't sit right. Can we talk about that? Hey, I know you didn't mean harm by that, but can we unpack that? Those are some phrases you might be able to use in a kind of non-confrontational way. However, sometimes confrontation surrounding racism is required. But one thing I wanted to share was at a high school in Minneapolis, students launched a campaign called Culture is Not a Costume ahead of Halloween. They created posters, announcements, and lunchroom booths inviting peers to consider, would this outfit feel like celebration or appropriation if someone wore it about your culture? So I just kind of included the Native American chiefs out on their trick-or-treating experience. Just something to think about. And I will say, maybe just from my own personal experience, it is sort of interesting sometimes these themes as a millennial and seeing how Gen Z is reacting to these kind of cultural processes we've been undergoing, and just kind of witnessing those moments of like, hey, I'm feeling a little old now. I remember when people used to do that, and it was like not okay.
I'm
So
sorry. There were some children that started screaming. I had to mute and change venue. I didn't want you to hear shrieking. I personally didn't want to hear shrieking, so bear with me for a second.
okay, that's fine.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. As you were, I'm sorry. Just want to let you know.
Okay, great. Thanks. So next is gender and gender identity strategies. Don't wait for others. Model it yourself. Normalize sharing pronouns. That reduces pressure on trans and non-binary folks. And using gender inclusive language instead of ladies and gentlemen, try everyone, friends, or y'all. I'm a y'aller. I'm a big fan of the y'all. I've lived in the South a lot, and I've never fully connected with the South, but when I'm out of the South, I throw the y'all around all the time. So try it out, y'all. And then understanding that gender is fluid. Judith Butler's work, Gender Trouble, kind of unpacks this in a pretty intense way. But there's a lot of scholarship out here now around it, and it's really interesting to just explore. And being easy with yourself is also encouraged. Oops. It's okay to say oops. Oops, they, not she. Sorry, thanks for your patience. Still kind of getting used to this whole thing. You're making the effort. It sort of reminds me of traveling abroad. And when I was living in Thailand, Thai people were just so stoked when you used their language. I think similar kind of frame can be applied to gender as it's really encouraged when you can hear that, it means a lot. And so here for this image, I've included an image actually from the University of Vermont and their registration system. And it's their attendance form. So again, I just kind of wanted to share that it doesn't need to be this great big communicative lift, but it's a process where if you're handing someone a form, you can change that little moment in their life through that form. Anytime you're handing over a clipboard, it can change someone's day. Next, we'll talk about sexual orientation strategies. Avoiding heteronormative assumptions. Um, you know, Instead of saying, "Do you have a boyfriend?" you could say something like, "Are you seeing someone?" Um, Calling in with care. I don't think that's how you meant it, but it could land poorly. Can we talk about that? Centering visibility as well. Mentioning LGBTQ plus IA voices naturally, not just in Pride Month. I think this is kind of goes for all the intersectional things that we're talking about. Is this, Black History Month is not just in February. We don't just care about Native Americans every November. But carrying that sense of care throughout the year is really important. And again, I've just got this image here from a woman who was at a counseling center in Austin, Texas. And they redesigned their intake form to ask partner instead of husband or wife. And that really made a big um, impact on her experience there, especially with something so sensitive as counseling. So the language that we use really has a lot of power and structure to the ways that we interact with each other and the world. Next, I wanted to talk about disability strategies. Asking before helping, not assuming would you like support with this, and avoiding kind of the inspiration tropes. The dream, believe, achieve. You're so powerful and so great. And I wanted to use this image of a documentary called Murder Ball, and it's these guys who play this like utterly medievally, barbarically ruthless game of what they call murder ball, which is this sport of kind of wheeling around and crashing into each other. It's intense. It's like rugby, but like times 10. And that really, I think that documentary is such a great work because it challenges this idea of like the disabled person being frail and unable to take care of themselves. Um, and using the social model of disability, this says that disability isn't the problem, inaccessible systems are. So focusing on barriers, not people. This is something I really think about just in the ways that we interact with our spaces. And I think disability is a great it prompts me to put myself in other people's shoes in a way that nothing else really does for me. At least personally, it definitely feels like when I'm interacting with a space that really comes up for me a lot. But I wanted to share this other case study of access ambassadors at the Seattle Art Museum. And they were trained to ask, is there anything I can do to support your access today? Instead of making assumptions or, kind of making examples of people. So this approach came from the social model of disability, and it replaced patronizing tones with autonomy-centered engagement. So asking that question, it's interesting as we zoom out how much of these strategies are just asking questions, staying curious and having that I guess it's like humility, but it's also a curiosity with that. And similarly, religious and belief systems. So avoid assuming. Not everyone celebrates Christmas. Try happy holidays. We're kind of trained at this now, but using inclusive calendars, it can be really meaningful. And admittedly, this is something, in my work with programming, I sometimes need to remind myself about. It's like, okay, we just scheduled that for like Eid on Ramadan. That's probably not the best time for that event. Let's pick a different one. So, using respectful curiosity, is there anything important for us to know about your observances or practices? And having that interfaith calendar is something that municipalities can employ, your workplace can use, your schools, and even in your homes. Those are opportunities for cultural exchange. Um, so I just kind of want to prompt that as a way for us to organize how we conceive of time and our relationship to all that. So again, revisiting that idea of intersectionality, we all have multiple identities that shape our experiences. So what other layers of this person's identity might affect their experience here is something worth considering. And this was really used in the Bay Area at a youth storytelling series, which was an after-school program that invited students to create zines exploring their intersecting identities, queer and Latinx, Muslim and disabled. The prompt asked them, what assumptions do people make when they see you? What don't they know? And the stories were displayed at a community event that fostered cross-identity empathy. So inviting these layered storytelling approaches helps people to see and honor the complexity of your lived experiences. So I hope that those strategies were useful and that you feel like you've learned or reconsidered or newly considered some things that you may not have before. Um, Now we're going to transition. I'm really thrilled to introduce our guests, and I'm going to basically just turn off my screen share now, and we're gonna all connect together. Um, so first, let's connect with Gary, since Sherry introduced herself first. Um, we're introduced by Gary. He's a poet and community organizer, well versed in speaking truth to power, and the experience may show us important and necessary dimensions of American life. Gary is someone who communicates with clarity, and he's joining us tonight to talk about his experiences with microaggressions. Thank you for being here, Gary. How do you relate to the topic of microaggressions?
Directly. I grew up as a fly in the milk concept of culture. I was the only of color family in an entirely uh, white area. It was affluent enough that that gave another layer of apathy, potential ignorance. I had to learn what I was experiencing before I was even able to understand what it was. I think I graduated high school in 2004 in Pittsburgh, PA, specifically in the North Hills. The culture is better now, and groups like Chris provides here, giving a common interest and empathy are well needed and need to continue because I think you harped on a couple of words that are important: empathy, which you may or may not have said; mindfulness, which you may or may not have said; but also meeting these people at their level where the disconnection starts. That requires also, for me, stepping outside of being emotionally triggered by some of these comments, and as you may, as I've seen in my life, a good percentage, more, almost two-thirds of these interactions are more of a cultural bias, more of inherent unknown social norms that sometimes we don't even understand that we are doing. And that's something that's profound to me. And that gives me a curiosity and interest and allows me to remove a malicious aspect. Some people don't want to be approached, period. And that's okay. That's something that remains. But growing up in an area where I had to learn not only what I was experiencing as a microaggression, but then to also have an adequate mentality of processing that in the moment and, excuse me, diagramming what it is, and then coming up with a strategy to relay to these people or this person that this is not cohesive with my culture or whatever else, and also adding a level of conversation. Maybe you can help me with this miscommunication, this problem we're having. As an experiment. I like to treat it sometimes as an experiment. I have a science background, but I had to learn on the spot. I think maybe back even in my era, microaggression wasn't even a consistent term, a common term, and even if it was like we knew in our community, but The fact that it's ironically enough now more and as an entirety of the community, specifically to allies, is a great feeling. So learning on the spot. I'm bright enough to be able to process these things and to know what's right and sound and what doesn't make me feel correct. And sometimes, certain words have specific connotations that have nothing to do with the definition, but have been manipulated into a meaning that means something different. And subsequently, those individuals in question are held accountable for those connotations. Learning, learning, and always giving grace and always apologizing. Saying I'm sorry, whether in these type of situations or in general, will always improve a situation, always improve a connection for me at least. Not a lot of people say I'm sorry as much as I had assumed. Sometimes when you apologize to people, they are more grateful than you would think, and that's something that also helps in these situations where there's a disconnect. I have a lot of personal experience, so sometimes it's hard to separate singular stories, but also to remove emotion, to remove the reason I'm approaching another individual in a conflict. But yeah, I have endless information. I want to be respectful and brief. So I would rather, if anyone have any questions specifically, or if you have a direction, I have a lot of notes. I have a lot of anecdotal, but also factual information and history basis of how living in Pittsburgh as a almost a double minority. I'm also technically on the spectrum of disability as well. So mental disability, mood disorders aren't also understood in a adequate amount of information enough to be empathetic, to not have disconnections in the same. So just learning about who you are, learning what makes you feel comfortable, learning how to deal with miscommunications. That's basically what these are. Things like growing up as a teenager, walking past individuals who will instinctively grab pat their purse to make sure the wallet to make sure it's still there. Um, where are your parents from? Are both of your parents of the same ethnicity? Um, Bless your heart is a term that I've actually grown to love growing older because I think there's more positive meaning in that term than negative. And I know if you don't understand, you may be offended by someone saying that to you, but that's a very respectful way of saying I appreciate your intention, but this may have missed the mark. And I take that sentiment with a lot of microaggression. That phrase, bless your heart. You don't have to say it out loud, but internalizing, bless your heart. But it helps you process. Humor helps me process these situations. You can help people laugh. I laugh at my own misfortunes, and that helps me be able to connect with people with humor in the same way. So, yeah, sure, yeah. Um, I'm really inspired by this platform, Chris. This is something I've literally been working up to my whole life. So the fact that it came singular in a path of my life, connected to you is it's grateful. I'm grateful for that. So thank you, man. Thank you.
Super happy to have you, Gary.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I
Yeah, and thank you for sharing your experience. I think I'm not going to interpret it for everybody, but I think it was, at least for me, what your experience of disability as it relates to mental health and being on the spectrum is, that just kind of like gave me chills a little bit because I hadn't even thought of that as I put this event together. So that was just, thank you for sharing that.
um
All right. Well, we're gonna have a Q&A after we hear from Sherry, because I am eager to hear from her, and I want to give us all a kind of collective space to field questions and ask questions to everybody. So if you have a question for Gary, just hold it for 1 sec, and then we'll get into a kind of bigger cumulative discussion. All right. So, yeah, I'm going to pass over to Sherry now. Sherry is a professional mediator who specializes in community-based conflict resolution. In her work with the Community Mediation Center of Calvert County, she's worked with schools, nonprofits, and community groups, and she brings a wealth of experience in helping people navigate difficult conversations with grace and clarity. Sherry, thank you for joining us tonight. We're so glad to have your voice in this event. I'm going to pass the microphone over to you now. And thanks so much for being here.
Absolutely. Thanks for inviting me, Chris. I appreciate it. So, as Gary was talking, I was sort of trying to remember the first time that maybe I had experienced a microaggression. And very interesting. A memory came back to me from when I was a very young child. I was visiting my grandmother in Florida, and we were at an art museum or something looking at things. And I guess I should preface this by saying that my family is Jewish. And so we're in this art museum, and my grandmother struck up a conversation with this other woman that was there. They seemed to be hitting it off, discussing the art they hadn't met before. This other woman said, we should get together sometime. I'd love you to come and have lunch at my club. And my grandmother was like, oh, that would be wonderful. And she asked what her name was at that point. And she said that her last name was Jacobson. And the woman asked, is that with an E or an O?
Oh,
And my grandmother answered, it's an O. And the woman said, oh, very nice meeting you. I need to go, or whatever, and went off. And at the time, as a child, I had no idea what was going on. And my grandmother had to explain it to me. And I think maybe I was 10, something like that, 8, 10. And that was the first time that I had ever not only experienced that, but heard of something like that. And so it's a memory that stuck with me to this day. So when, people talk about microaggressions, they're not always that micro. Things can really stick with you for a long time. I was just reading about it today, actually, and came across an article where because people like to argue about wording, and some people didn't like the micro part, some people didn't like the aggression part. So this article was suggesting subtle acts of exclusion, which I think captures it really well. When these things happen, it makes you feel like you're being excluded. You're not a part of whatever is going on. And definitely I felt that then. So working at the mediation center, we deal with all sorts of people, and we deal with people in conflict. So when I was the director, I made sure to try and train my staff to, I guess, first of all, try to prevent themselves from committing microaggressions. So I thought what I would do is sort of walk you through some of the examples that I have from my work experience and what I taught my staff. So one of the things, and this applies to other work situations besides just what we do. So one of the first things is when a client calls, we do an intake with them over the phone. So I'm sure a lot of workplaces have some sort of process where you have to talk to somebody over the phone and collect information. So, the first thing is just their name. Sometimes people will have names that are difficult for the person on the other end to understand what they're saying, have no idea how to spell it, not understand how to pronounce it. And that's fine. That happens. However, when it gets to the point where you've been told a name several times and you're still mispronouncing it or not trying to pronounce it correctly, or just saying, oh, that's too hard, I'll just call you X, and making up some sort of nickname that the person doesn't give you, that's a real microaggression there. And that happens to kids in the classrooms a lot, with teachers who don't want to take the time to learn how to pronounce a child's name correctly. One of the other ones is we do a lot of divorce mediations. So perhaps one spouse will call us asking for a mediation, and I made sure to train my staff, don't ever make an assumption husband, wife, right? Use the word spouse or partner. Typically, if they're asking for a divorce, then they're spouses. But again, if you're talking to a woman, and we'll get into gender next, but don't assume that their spouse is the husband. Because again, you're making a heteronormative assumption there that, may or may not be correct. And again, sometimes it's, they can correct you, you say, I'm sorry, but it's those things that pile up over time when everybody makes that assumption. You face it every day. It can just get really exhausting. Another one is, we also use the term co-parent instead of necessarily mother or father. What is the name of your co-parent? So we're not, again, making a gender assumption. Another one would be gender. Because we are funded by the state, we have to collect demographics, one of which is gender. The state form that we were told to use had two choices, male, female, which really aren't even genders. But I'm not going to get into that at this point. So I basically called up the state judiciary that funds our program and said, I can't use this form. Here's what I'm going to do instead. And when we do the intake, we ask people just, what is your gender? And we let them name what it is. Because there are many that it could be. Trying to list them all out on a form can get really unwieldy. If you have to use a written form, I would just suggest, prefer to self-describe and leave a blank, something like that. And again, it's making sure you're not making people feel excluded right from the beginning. The first interaction they have with an agency can really set the tone. So you don't want to make people feel like they're being excluded from the get-go. One of the other ones, actually, I saw this in the comment. I live in Southern Maryland. There is a lot of people who are very serious about their Christianity here in Southern Maryland and like to tell people, not just in a personal setting, but in a professional setting, have a blessed day. Again, that's really making some assumptions about the person you're talking to, that they're religious or maybe they're of a particular religion. And that can really land wrong with some people. Again, it's coming from a good place, mostly, I assume. But again, it can make people feel excluded. Just like I saw in the comments, somebody said they wish them a blessed Easter. Well, if you happen not to celebrate Easter like I don't, or Christmas like I don't, it's just sort of, I usually just say thanks you too, but it piles up and it can get exhausting when you hear that again and again and again, and your holiday's not acknowledged. So I would say really be careful with messages on answering machines and what they say, and talking to people in, using terms like a blessed day or telling people Merry Christmas, like Chris said, Happy Holidays, although some people in our community get offended by happy holidays, but oh well, you can't please everybody. Let's see. Some of the other things, just general in the office to, things to be careful of, are things like Chris said, scheduling things on holidays that may not be majority holidays. So again, that multi-faith calendar is great. I had never seen one of those before like that. So that's a great thing to have. Office decorations. Again, if you're going to decorate your office around holidays, try to be mindful about what other holidays might be occurring at that time. Are there appropriate decorations that you could also put in the office? Or just having something, say, a winter theme or something like that, so that you're not conveying a particular religion. Let's see. The mental health issue. Again, just people sometimes, and again, it's not generally coming from a bad place, but I've heard people say things like, oh, I'm so OCD, talking about how they like to have things organized, right? And so that's really downplaying the effect that mental illness has on people's lives by sort of just tossing it around as like a little personal quirk of yours. So really be careful, how else could you say that, oh, I really like to be organized, or, I get twitchy if stuff is out of place. But if you don't have OCD, don't describe yourself as having OCD, because it really just minimizes the struggle that people who do have that are going through. And then lastly, going back to our intake process, and I think this is something, Chris, you mentioned as well, is sort of global access, asking questions that aren't necessarily focused on, do you have a disability and how do we have to, what do we have to do to make things better for you? But asking everybody when we do our intakes, there anything else you feel like our staff should know about you? Is there anything that would make your accessing our program easier for you? And that question gets asked to everybody. Most of the time, people say no, but occasionally people do have things. I've been asked, bright lights really bother me. Could you make sure that if you've got fluorescent lights that they're turned down or off? Temperature things. So, I mean, it's not even necessarily a disability or something like that, but just something that makes people feel like you're trying to accommodate them. And it's not just asking people with a disability what accommodations they would need, but making that a global question for everybody. And I think the more we can do that, the better off it is, because then you're not making people feel excluded by just, asking certain questions of them only. So I think I'll stop there, and if people have any questions or anything, I'd be glad to answer them as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sherry. That was deeply insightful. Um, Thank you for reminding us that there's so many tools that we have to make us safe and inclusive spaces. So thank you.
Sure.
All right, everybody. So now let's transition into a Q&A. So kind of gonna open this space up for your questions. If there's something you've been sitting with, a reaction, a reflection, or something you'd like our speakers to expand on, or something that you'd like to expand on, please drop it in the chat or feel free to speak. And I have some questions that I could ask as well, but I'm eager to hear what we all um, are curious about or would like to expand on. So.
I actually do have a question I'd love to throw out there to this group. Was just wondering, sometimes it's not ourselves who are committing the microaggression, but we observe somebody else doing it, and the person that they're aggressing against is there. So we're observing this interaction. And so I guess my question is, and it may not be a one answer for all situations, is it best to let that person respond to it, assuming that, to assume they're able to handle it? If they want to handle it, they will, or is it better to jump in and say something yourself? Which again, I think can show allyship, but it can also disempower the person that's being aggressed against by having somebody jump in before they even have a chance to respond. So I was wondering what people's thoughts are about that.
So pride is always a consideration in these situations for both parties, but you want to make sure the person is respected and doesn't feel less than or even disenfranchised for creating, committing a microaggression. So it's complicated. That's all I can add there. That's a good question.
Pam, you got your hand up?
Yeah, I've heard a couple of things to remember One is if I do want to say something, never to say if I were a member of that group. That would be really bothersome to me. Never to say that, but rather to say, ouch, it's really painful for me to hear you say that.
Yeah, I like
And
that.
the other, yeah, and the other thing that is not, again, not directly an answer to your question, Sherry, but I learned from my teacher, Leonie Smith. Um, um, if you're in a position of power in the situation, like if you're facilitating something and it happens in a class or something that you're facilitating, you can say, I want to pause here for a minute and check with so and so. I'm concerned that there might be some impact in the room, or not even with so and so. I'm concerned that, I know you didn't mean anything negative at all by that, but I'm concerned there might be some impact in the room, and I want to attend to that right now.
Mhm. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Angela. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. Um, in line with the question was stated, Sherry and Pam, you that gave me some very good insight. I'm also affiliated with the Community Mediation Center. And one of the challenges I have encountered was addressing someone by their pronouns. Okay. And I'm trying if I have to turn my camera on. And in doing so, we've been talking about someone may say, I like to be referred to the pronouns, etc. And someone would say, well, it's just too much for me to do that, make that transition. You know, how do you deal with that? Let's see this worse here. Oh, there it is. Okay. Hi. How do you handle that?
Uh, I call it cultural apathy. It takes work. It requires work to know things and to know people, to learn information. We are not born as allies or not. So we cultivate ourselves with knowledge, education, learning. I have to say this strongly. You're not willing to educate yourself. This these type of situations will not work out for you. It requires acknowledgement of not knowing what you don't know and being willing to learn that. If that's
Okay.
not the process that individuals are willing to deal with, it will be difficult. And that's a personal, reflection, personal growth. That's part of their own journey. But in that situation, requires learning. You're not willing to learn outside of your own perspective or comfort zone. It's very hard to have those kind of conversations or connections. Or yeah, that's all I have.
Thank you. Another challenge I encountered was sometimes we have to write emails and write letters, etc. So I got away from saying Mr. Mrs., the old school way. Now I just say greetings because, and use a full name, first name and last name. It felt a little awkward initially, but it's caught on with other mediators. So we're now just using full names.
Um,
Thank you for the presentation. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it. I appreciate your comment.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I think going back to the mediation issue, one of the things I did forget to mention is at the beginning of every mediation, and this, again, can work with anybody anywhere, is, we usually have a sheet that has their names on it. But I always ask, how would you like to be addressed in this session? So, again, because some people, have nicknames, some people go by names that are completely different from their legal name. So I think it's really important to ask people how they would like to be addressed and introduce yourself as well, how you would like to be addressed. And, sharing your own pronouns can help too. It's sort of, as Chris said, it sort of makes it, if you're the first one to do it, it makes it easier for somebody else.
Okay. I have to admit, I had no idea how that worked with pronouns. I had to call a family member and ask for their help. And they were so delighted that I called and asked. And I thought it could be offended them. I said, I don't mean to offend you, but I need to learn something here, and I don't know what else to go to. And they were so helpful and help me understand how the pronouns come to play and how to use them, etc.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, it's interesting how, again, going back to that, just I'm taking curiosity in your lived experience is so affirming and valuable. And it's just so, I think it's just such a special gift to be able to offer someone to take interest in their life. All right, Pam, I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, but I want to make sure not to talk if someone else has anything.
No, you're good. There's one question in the chat, but feel free to shoot your question, and we'll get to that question after.
Okay, I just want to could I just try really quick an answer to your question, Angela? Could you say to me, oh, it's too hard to use your pronoun? Was that your question?
Yes,
Could you
I've
say
heard.
that to me and I'm going to just try and answer and we
Okay,
can see if
okay.
it works? I'm not
Okay,
sure.
so you've already mentioned some things as that's a whole lot to remember. I can't understand that. I don't understand it. I can remember the pronouns. I don't know how to use that. That's just too hard. Why can't you just say something else?
So I hear you, Angela, and I think what I'm hearing you say is there's already so much going on, and it's almost a little overwhelming to think about using my pronoun of they instead of what might seem apparent. Is that what you're telling me?
It's confusing. Yes, yes.
Okay, so it's not just that it's a little bit hard and a little overwhelming, but it's also confusing because you're not used to this.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, if you're willing to just think about it for today, and if you ever want to have a conversation about why it actually is really important to me to be called they and not she, if you're willing at some point, I'd love to have that conversation with you.
Okay, I can consider that. Thank you. Okay,
I couldn't do that in one,
I can see. I can feel
but
that.
yeah, it's something that I think Gary said about, or somebody said about, yeah, I don't remember Gary, that I think you said something about how you receive the person. But you can also receive the person who's doing the microaggression in that way.
Okay.
So
That's nonviolent communication, by the way, if you ever
Right.
want to look.
Yeah.
it's a study, Martin Luther King's his words, his verbiage of it still rings true. Steady, loving confrontation applies not just to the civil rights movement of that era, but the progression of empathy in situations like this company. You have to be steady, you have to be loving, and you have to be, confronting. And those three all at the same time.
Mm.
Yeah, that's how I feel. I hope I didn't offend you with my tone or language. It was coming from empathy. I hope you know that. Okay.
Yeah,
I'm
great.
moved. I'm very moved by what you just said.
Oh,
This topic is interesting. When you started talking earlier, I realized I had some microaggression, and unaware, maybe sometimes aware, some awareness, but mostly I don't. I did not, even from years back, because of stereotypes and everything else. So it has helped me over the past years to um, be more intentional, how we address people and think about things, how it may impact them. So this is a very good topic. We should have a larger, like to share this information more with others.
I felt the same way. Like,
Yeah.
right? We can only get more enlightened and hate each other less, theoretically.
Very good.
Thank you. Thank you for your wonderful questions, Angela. Those are really, really poignant questions and it gave rise to a beautiful demonstration. Thank you for sharing that as well, Pam. It was
I
really,
appreciate
really helpful. If we're going to get to the chat, because I promised the chat we would address the chat, but I have a question afterward. So Sandra in the chat asked a really interesting question that I'm kind of curious to hear everyone else's thoughts on. What body language could be taken as microaggressive? How can you communicate a microaggression through your body?
Defensive body language in a speaking situation or addressing someone's situation, how squared your shoulders are specifically to your hips, to your knees, to your feet in relation to that person. Keeping open hand stance. Even to animals have the same effect. So even that's all I really have. Basically, I have other connections through mind, but body language is 90, actually, about 90% of, I think it's more, but it's about 90% of communication. Verbal is a very small percentage of actual communication. Most communication is not of your mouth, it's with your body. So there are lots of, and I'm still learning, there are lots of little pieces. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm even thinking about one of the instances you brought up earlier, Gary, is walking down the street and women will clutch their purse
Yeah,
when yeah. So I mean, I think that's a great example of microaggression in body language. Sometimes what I see as a mediator is one participant will be talking and the other one will be rolling their eyes for whatever reason. That could be seen as a microaggression. Um, so, things like that, I think, as well. Not wanting to sit next to somebody or close to them.
yeah. I'm not sure if anyone else has had these experiences of being followed around stores, department stores. It still happens to me to this day. There's a common perception of me as a thief in stores and businesses. I don't know where it comes from, but it does still exist. I was chased out of a Giant Eagle a few weeks ago as a grown man in a professional looking situation. When I was not stealing, I was very hungry. I wasn't even able to buy the food. I was so disgusted with that interaction. I actually wasn't able to buy food. I had to go somewhere else just to buy some food. So yeah, it's there are a lot of different versions. I'm still learning my cultural biases. So, because there are things, even though I'm a part of a minority community, I'm just as much as anyone still capable of ignorance, of microaggression. So, and I mean, I'm a hetero, so I have to deal with a lot of the heteronormative tropes and or stereotypes, connotations. That requires work too. It's a consistent and a constant learning process. I love learning, so I like these things, but not everybody feels the same way about learning or about being different or learning more. So that's another personal battle struggle as well. Do you want to connect more, or do you want to be the same person? Those are choices. I could talk about this for hours, so I'm just going to stop myself here. I appreciate this platform. It's very, very validating, affirming, and enlightening. So I hope it continues.
Yeah, most definitely. Thank you for sharing, Gary. One thought I had around this is how microaggressions sometimes may not be directly, they may not fit the mold of what we generally assume would be aggressive. And instead, it could be a matter of disengagement. So if someone's talking and you just kind of actively could care less, that is also communicating something. Um, and this is maybe my own weird thing, but in Thailand, there's a cultural practice of not pointing your feet when you sit. So if I sat down and crossed my feet this way and my foot was facing that way, and someone who was an elder or kind of had a higher sort of like respect that they commanded. Like my superior, if my boss was sitting next to me and I sat with my foot pointing to them, that would be a sign of disrespect. And I've become like weirdly conscious of that. It's like a thing where if I'm like waiting for the bus, I'm like not crossing my legs because it's just I can't. Someone's getting the foot. Um, so yeah, I don't know. It's kind of thinking about like just the way your comportment, basically the way that you just your body is something I've thought about. There's this theorist Bakhtin who was a Russian theorist and wrote about Dostoevsky's work and how there were multiple voices all at the same time, and we are all essentially doing that in our daily life. And like your body is sort of the tongue of itself, speaking of itself continually. And so that really kind of just registered for me is like, there are times where, um, I'm quietly covered in tattoos and nobody knows. And there are times where that in itself is like, a conscious effort to show some degree of respect or a respect to the position or the place that I have. And then there's other times where that feels more like welcoming and taking that cultural approach to tattooing. And just since we're talking about the bodies, like, in Japan, that despite it being taboo, it's also seen as this process of intimacy. You're not showing your tattoos in public, but for the people who do get to see that tattoo, it really means a lot. And I think we kind of just the way we carry our bodies says, we do that too. In how we open up to people and the boundaries and barriers we put aside as well.
Yeah, I think as women, we sometimes experience some gender microaggressions around um, touching from men. I remember being in grad school and I had at least one professor, probably two, who every time he would talk to a woman, he would put his arm on her shoulder. And he didn't do that to the male students. And even just, personal space, when strangers will come up and just be in your space. I feel like that's a pretty common gender microaggression that feminine presenting people get a lot.
Yeah, I want to add there was a kind of a stretch of years when it was popular among like young men to say no homo if they were like drinking out of the same cup or something. Just got to diffuse any possibility that this could be a homosexual advance. No homo. So it's just interesting how those things are become almost like cultural memes for us. Does anyone else have any questions or thoughts they'd like to put forward?
Showing gratitude again, Chris. That's all I wanted to show. To say, aside from what I've said, is thank you and thank you all for being part of the platform.
Definitely. Thank you, Gary. Yeah, it's wonderful having you. So I did want to ask some prompts to just kind of get us to access our own lived experiences. And I'm gonna just kind of, when I was going through this, I was really envisioning that we would split up into a couple groups and then talk about it and come back. But it seems like I think we're all having a nice little kumbaya together. So I'm going to just keep it how we're doing it. That being said, I wanted to kind of probe some reflection on how we engage with microaggressions, and I think Angela's questions really started peeling some of that open for us. But I want you to reflect on, what's one microaggression you've witnessed or experienced in your life? So for instance, we've talked about the bless your heart. If that applies to you, I'd love to hear how that showed for you. Or alternatively, if you are if you are now in hearing this, identifying ways that you've potentially microaggressed, and you've kind of done done a microaggression in your life.
Hmm.
Well, as we've been talking here, I'm trying to kind of imagine, I don't see myself as an aggressive person, but I probably, when when I feel cornered or when things are new, when I don't understand, or feel threatened, I might try to, I probably do use some words, that could be like microaggression. So I'm increasing the self-awareness through this conversation. So that's um
I appreciate
but yeah, I guess the you know, just raising your kids. I mean, if you've had experience with teenagers, there's a lot of microaggressions that, because the parent is sort of the power and the kid will often be sort of aggressive, either micro or macro, but it's just part of the journey. Um, and I was thinking about how much culture kind of does fit into this too, just the stoic cultures where they can just say blunt things and not even know what they're saying. Um, anyway, it's just something that's twirling around inside my head. Observations.
I appreciate that you were able to have growth even in this conversation. It takes courage to say it, to admit fault, to say I'm sorry. So thank you for doing that. I don't know you at all, but thank you for showing the courage. Hopefully it continues. Ripple effects. Yeah.
Right, right. Yeah, thanks. Appreciate that.
Yeah, go for it, Pam.
I want to mention one that a friend told me about because it's really poignant. So there were these two white women who were on a Zoom call with a Native woman, and the Native woman had a piece of art, Native art behind her, and the one or two of the white women said to her, um, "Oh, we've been to." I don't remember some sort of we've been to a native ceremony or we've been to a ghost dance. I don't remember because it was a ghost dance poster art. And they were just trying to make connection. And I was told about this by my friend who is friends with this native woman and had been on the call together. And the woman said, I'm going to take the time, said to her, but not to those women. They just decided not to work together because the Native woman said that that was an incredibly painful thing for them to say, that I've been to a Native ceremony or a ghost dance ceremony or something, because it displayed so much ignorance about how um, holy or sacred that ceremony was about, I think she said it was like a Dakota, I think they said it was a Dakota ceremony. And then the Native woman was saying, there are so many different people within the Dakota people and like so many different, there were just so many levels. And when my friend shared this with me, I just thought, I would have no idea of any of that. Like it's really like it's just call it microaggressions, but sometimes it's extremely innocent. And I find that so poignant because it also still has real impact. And I think the only thing we can do is, I didn't hear the very beginning, but when we find out, I know you said, apologize and keep trying to learn, try to keep learning.
I'm thankful that I love learning. I think that helps me as an empath, as an ally to allies, because I also have to, as a minority, I have to meet the allies in connection. It doesn't just happen naturally, and that's something that I have to discern as well. Are you prepared to be an ally? Am I prepared to accept your allyship? Can we work together? It's a again back to the study, love, and confrontation. Yeah, yeah. But it's it's an ever going and ever continuing process. Never stops. So I think that's, as a perpetual learner, that's a nod to me. That hopefully over time we will continue to evolve and create more spaces like this. Perhaps not just in a Zoom situation, real life and different places of the United States and the world. Can we teach people how to understand each other? That's basically what this is, but it's much more complex. Uh, yeah, that's a thought provoking statement. Yeah, I'll think about that after this. Thank you for saying that.
I'm thinking about that word allyship, and how sometimes microaggressions can almost appear like we're helping, but we're actually being quietly aggressive. Um, I'm thinking about like, your mother-in-law telling you to slow down on the mashed potatoes because she cares about you. She really does. Or the like, oh man, like the check-in question when Kathy was like, I'm tired. It's okay for Kathy to say she's tired, but if I said to Kathy, oh man, you look tired, huh? You could use some rest, I bet. There would be like, excuse me? Whenever someone tells me I'm tired, I'm like, oh, it's over. It's
Right.
over for you. Um, but yeah, it's interesting just the ways that aggression can be kind of subtly hidden underneath that veneer of care and concern. Susan added something to the chat I'll read out for us here. At work, there is a monthly newsletter to the staff. It begins with shout outs where people can thank other people. It is obvious to me and others that there are staff who don't get recognized. The whole thing feels like favoritism and microaggression week after week. Wow, yeah, that is such a real and
Yeah,
authentic observation.
yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
the people who are not employee of the month. What is that experience like for them? You know?
um, I'm glad someone brought up a question about or a comment about the workplace. The workplace is a consistency of microaggression, um, specifically if there's not a cohesive understanding of inclusion. And I'm sure everyone has laundry lists of those. So that rings true. I think that may be a great place to start with a lot of these uh, tactics, mentalities, and tensions. Of the workplace, ground zero, where a lot of different communities are integrated together.
Well, I think we lost Gary here. It's all right, Gary. We've got this recorded. So sad to miss him for that last little bit, but that's all right. With that, I think with that abrupt transition, I will kind of transition us out of this conversation, and move towards just wrapping up our evening. However, I do want to provide space if there's any other kind of final comments or questions, any kind of last words that anyone would kind of like to put a bow on the conversation with.
I have a question. It's very light. It may be comical. Is calling someone honey or baby someone in the store, checkout person? Here, baby. Here, honey. Is that microaggression? It's a pet peeve of mine. That's why I asked.
I don't know if I'm definitely not the authority on this. I'm gonna
Okay.
defer to someone else.
For me, it would really depend on who was saying it. If you said it to me, I would not consider it a microaggression. I'd be like, it's another woman being friendly. If a man said it to me, I'd probably consider it a microaggression.
Okay. It's always a woman for me. And it's usually a younger woman or someone my age. I'm like, what? Okay. Just something.
All right. Well, great. I think that's a great closing question. Um, Now, let's move on here. I'm gonna share a post-event survey with you all, if that's okay. Before we close, I just kind of want to invite you to take a moment to complete this survey. It only takes 2 or 3 minutes, and your feedback helps us improve and continue to offer meaningful programming like this. I'm gonna drop that link in the chat, so um, check that out here. So if you could please just give that a look over and kind of report on your experience. It would give us a lot of insight. Also, we're a nonprofit organization, and events like this are made possible by people like you. So if you found value in this space and you're able to support our work financially, we would be honored to receive your gift. You can give at the link that I'm including here, also in the chat. So that first link is a survey, and the second is a link for donation. But as we close, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for being part of this space. Thank you for your honesty, your openness, and your willingness to expand your perspective. I really enjoyed our conversation tonight. I loved how organic it felt and just receiving everyone's lived experiences and questions, and it just felt really sincere. Um, and what I loved also was that tonight wasn't about perfection. It was about learning. This was a learning event. It was truly about just showing up, taking one more step toward creating spaces where everyone feels safe and valued. And now I would like to sincerely thank our incredible guest speakers, Gary Wingfield Jr. and Sherry Tardio, for their generosity, wisdom, and valuable insight. Yes, yeah, jazz hands for both of you. Your conversation tonight was a gift, and we're so grateful you are a part of this experience. And next, I'd like to thank all of our audience members for being in attendance with us. Thank each and every one of you for being here, and let's take these tools back into our families, our workplaces, our faith communities, classrooms, and neighborhoods. So with no further ado, I'm going to say thank you so much for being here, and I hope you all have a wonderful, amazing night. Please join us next month as we explore some themes around Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. Should be a really interesting experience.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
Thank
Night,
you.
everybody.
Thank you.
And thanks everyone for being here. If this was your first time, looking forward to seeing you again.
Thank you. Good night.
All right. Good night, Susan. Thanks so much. All right, everybody. I'm closing out here. Thank you so much. Have a great night.